they don't have the supporting experience to say, actually, I think this character wouldn't wear a corset. Like, I know it's period, but like, here are the reasons why maybe it wouldn't be this, or it would be a corset, but it would be say like one that has elastic or something that gives them more flexibility, or whatever, and we can talk through that compromise.
When we think about originating artists, we usually think about the writers or the directors, but what about all the other originating artists? Today's conversation with Stephanie Mae Fisher, a costume designer and a very good friend of mine, I think will open up your mind a little bit to the other originating artists in the process and how collaborating with them is vital.
Welcome back to the interview series, everyone, which I'm still currently calling Writer Talk. Writer Real Talk? Writer Real Talk. That's what it is. In which I interview writers and other originating artists who work in the musical theater. Each interview will have a topic or a theme that we will be discussing along the way, but we may meander. Who's to say? It's all an experiment. I don't know. So, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest for today. Now, Stephanie is someone that I met so many years ago when I moved to Rochester, New York in high school, my sophomore year, and somewhere in the first week there, little story that maybe we'll tell, I don't know. I met this young lady who quickly became one of my best friends in the world and still is today. I first knew her as a performer and a singer, as well as a clarinetist. And very quickly, she also became a favorite costume design friend of mine as she went forward in her studies, and we became just closer human beings. And now we live together. We're in the same apartment right now, just different rooms. Isn't that weird and delightful?
You wouldn't be able to tell it though from anything about the rooms.
Nope. We're on opposite sides of one wall right now, but who could say? So please join me in welcoming our guest today, Stephanie Mae Fisher. Hey, Steph.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm hot because it's August.
It is August in New York City. It is hot, it's humid, and very schwitzy. Very, very schwitzy. But for the audience, could you please tell us a little bit about who you are? How you identify as an artist, what you do in your life and career, and maybe what work of yours may have been seen at some point in different locations?
Sure. I figured you would ask this at some point. It's an ever-changing and evolving thing, particularly in the last couple of years.
Okay.
I started my career as a stitcher and spent about 6 or 7 years doing that while also designing in my spare time, working more when I wasn't at work. And I did that in a few different places. I started in Cleveland at Great Lakes Theater, and was designing at places like Cleveland Public Theater and some other small organizations there, all of which do like remarkable work that people, I think, don't think of Cleveland as an arts hub, but it is to a degree that is like not known to people that didn't go to school there and grow up there.
Yeah, I had no idea until you were working in that area. I was like, oh, there are this many opportunities?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, obviously, compared to New York, like it's a different beast, but there's many colleges there that sort of feed into the local scene and then also feed into places like New York and LA, and musical theater programs, which is not what I ever was going to school for, but I went to school with people that very much were and very much are still doing it. There was someone from my undergrad who just joined the cast of 6 like a couple weeks ago. So
I didn't know that. The Broadway cast?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know her personally, but she comes up in my suggested friends all the time. And so from there, I moved to Baltimore, which is a market that is much harder to work in as a theater technician. There's basically only one professional theater that pays anybody a living, and it's a very small production organization. Their costume shop is like 2 people. It's Baltimore Center Stage, and they'll overhire people, but there's no like full-time stitching position. And actually the job that I would need to get in order to get my dream job someday of being in charge of their costume shop is open right now, and it's like killing me a little bit that it's not a good time for me to apply and pick up and move to Baltimore, but because I never expected that job to open. So while I was there, I was actually commuting to Washington, D.C. for most of my work, and stitching at Washington National Opera and Signature Theater in Virginia, and doing some wardrobe at Shakespeare Theater. So I've kind of like made it my mission to do every costume support role as I also, become the designer that I want and hope to be.
Smart.
Because I think it really affects the way I interact with the team. So I've been a costume shop manager at New York Stage and Film. I've done a bunch of wardrobe. I'm now starting to work in both like larger scale commercial theater and film as an assistant. So I like to have my fingers in everything. And I would say very much both a maker and a designer. I don't see myself leaving either one behind at any point.
Excellent. Yeah, you do a lot of things. You have many skills. You constantly impress me with how many skills you have, and then choose to acquire. Because many a time you've moved into a situation where you're like, I don't know if I know fully what this job is, but we're gonna find out.
And so far none of them have killed me, which I wasn't always sure of going in or coming out, but I'm alive, so.
Living is good, dying is not so good.
So far so good.
Oh wow. Yeah, and you've worked at a lot of places. I recall that period of time in when you were in Baltimore and commuting to DC all the time, because we were on the phone a lot. I was commuting to Long Island, you were commuting to DC, and like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, driving. But I think it's impressive the number of different places you've worked and the number of different jobs you've done. It gives you a lot of perspective into what all is involved or could be involved at these different levels of theater in your department.
Yeah, there's a model of working in general in the world that is what most people do, which is like they get a job at an office and they stay at that. And maybe it's not as true anymore, but it used to be you get a job in an office and you stay there and just get promoted until you can't be anymore, and then you retire. And that sounds like torture to me.
Me too.
So never have really been into that. And I when I first started my career, I thought like, I need to go learn the right way to do everything. And then I very quickly figured out that there are many right ways. And the only way to learn those right ways is to work for a lot of different people. So I've learned different things from everybody I've worked for, every draper, every designer. But I also have learned like 6 or 7 ways to do the same thing, which is so valuable, because when you're working at like different levels on different timelines with different budgets, even day to day, the version of that thing that you use changes. So I could do the same alteration 3 different ways in a week, depending on who I'm working for and what our timelines are and how much they're paying me and all of those things. So
right, which is, first of all, fascinating to me that that's a thing that you can do, but also I think it makes design so unique in the theater, whereas like on the artistic side, writing, performing, directing, I feel like there are fewer options. Like there are a certain set of tools that everybody uses, and it doesn't really depend on how much you're getting paid necessarily, or even your timeline. Like there's a certain set of tools, and that's what's going to be done. But on the design side, the fact that the same thing can be done 6 or 7 different ways is kind of blows my mind if I really sit down and think about it too hard. I try not to. But I'd be curious to hear more about that at some point. But we don't have to talk more about that today.
Well, for me, what's cool about it, and I don't need to say a lot about this, but what's cool about it is that I think once you realize that, it eases some pressure a little bit, because just because your impulse is to do something a different way than, say, your boss wants it done, doesn't mean that that way is wrong, and it doesn't mean that you're stupid, and it doesn't mean that you're never going to get hired again. It just means that you learn from someone with a different set of instructions, or in a different context where that might have been the best way to do something. So I have trouble remembering that when I put a lot of pressure on myself, but like there's not just one right way, which I think a certain generation of theater technicians in particular would have you believe that there is one right way. But I have learned from so many of that generation of theater technicians that I know that they don't even agree on what that one thing would be.
Yeah, and I do think that is an important just general lesson for anyone who works in this industry to remember, is there is no one right way to do anything. And just because you learned X, Y, or Z does not mean that you are any less than anyone else.
Right. I will note that in certain contexts, especially as technicians, there is a right way, and that involves safety. So like
Fair.
I think for electricians and like people who build scenery, there is a much narrower path as far as what's allowed and what's safe.
Yes, safety is always paramount. Please. Well, lovely. I'd love to do a little getting to know you. I've got some questions here before we dive into our topic today, which for those of you playing at home is about collaboration with design. Broadly, we'll get more specific, I assume. The two of us are chatty folks. But my first question to you is there a writer, does not have to be musical theater, but it can be, but is there a writer's work that you as a designer gravitate toward?
Yes. I, without even having read all of her work, because I don't read a lot of plays, Sarah Rule for me is just like so inspiring, and I feel like every time I read or see one of her plays, it pushes me to think differently about what a play can be and what a character can be. And like I've never designed melancholy play, but it has to be a brilliant mind that in the course of a live theatrical event wants you to turn a person into an almond. Like I'm just obsessed with that idea. And I have no idea how it actually is achieved, but yeah, I always like get stars in my field of vision when I am around her work.
And is it just because her work just so readily forces you to think outside the box?
I think that's a lot of it. There's also there's a whimsy to her work that I really identify with, as you might be able to see. I love, a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of, very serious heightened realism that is also ridiculous. And like her interpretations of very old and well-beloved stories, I think are very interesting and fresh, and I want to design all of them, honestly. Like I would just, if my life's work could be designing her entire canon, that would make me so happy.
You heard it here first, folks. If you know Sarah Rule, get her on the phone. Please and thank you. That's fun, and I also think that that's interesting. The way that you describe her work, I think, also describes a certain sect of musical theater that I also personally know that you enjoy. That the idea of the whimsy, but the seriousness with which heightened things can be taken. The way that it might force you to think outside the box for many different reasons. But yeah, that's a good answer. We love Sarah Rule. All right, next question. thus far in your career, and let's keep it to theater for the moment. But if you want to expand past that, please feel free. Is there something that you would consider having been your biggest challenge thus far?
Oh, that's there's so many possible answers to this. I am finding, and this is a very current discovery, that when I was a stitcher, I was very much like at the bottom rung of a certain hierarchy, and I was okay there because, which is ridiculous also, because stitching is like very skilled work and can make or break a designer's output, basically. Like if your stitchers are not good, or if you treat them badly, that's a make or break moment. And yet stitching is, like, in many cases, very low paying, and it's considered sort of entry level, which is, I'm grateful that that's how I got started, but also it's ridiculous.
Because it's such a specific skill set.
Yeah. So I was okay there because I was like learning, and it's math, right? It's like there's, as discussed, there are many right ways to do something, but there's always one way that the person in charge of you wants it done. And so there's like a beginning, middle, end, there's an answer. And I was okay there. And I am also very good at being in charge. Like that is something that I have been very comfortable with since I was very young. I panic about it when I'm anticipating leadership roles, but once I'm in them, I tend to thrive. So when I'm the designer, when I am the shop manager, I typically feel pretty good about like what needs to be done and how to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing that I'm discovering is a huge challenge for me is being an assistant, which is almost being in charge, except that as an assistant, I am not generating the thoughts about what needs to happen. I'm trying to interpret somebody else's thoughts about what needs to happen, and what the timelines for those things are. And that has been the last year in which I've like started to do that at a variety of levels for a bunch of different people, and in film and in theater. That has been one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And it makes me very eager to be in charge again.
Yeah, understandable. For those at home who may not know what the job of an assistant is, could you just quickly give a rundown of what that potentially
I'll let you know
can
when
entail?
I figure it out.
Fair enough.
So, well, the parts that I know how to do are, for example, for a large musical or something where there's a shop or there is the opportunity to make some of the clothes, swatching is one of the responsibilities. So, and that I know doesn't mean anything to people that are not in my field, because my family's always like, what is that again? So basically, like, I run around the garment district with digital copies of the sketches and get little pieces of fabric. This is for a vest and pants I'm making. I get little pieces of fabric according to what the designer has told me they're interested in, and I take all of this information about it and bring it back to them, and they flip through and they go no, and then they decide, and then I go buy the thing. So that's my favorite part, because I love fabric, and because of all my years of making things, I'm good at fabric. I understand fabric, which shockingly is something that like a lot of designers don't have a background in. So that's one of those things that I'm very grateful to my technician background for. But that is just like one tiny part of the job of being an assistant. And then, there's a lot of paperwork involved, which is different depending on where you're working and who's going to use it and the size of the cast. And, there are basic frameworks, but I have rarely used the same templates twice because they just don't always work in every context.
This just keeping records of of like the individuals and costumes and what all's involved, or are you talking like more financial record sort of stuff?
All of it.
Okay.
So like I always start, whether I'm a designer or an assistant, like usually there's some kind of a scene breakdown that then gets expanded into like, not only this is the character that this person is in this scene, but also this is what they wear as that character. So there's that, and then there's usually like piece lists that each actor will typically get a copy of, so they can see what they're supposed to be wearing, and wardrobe uses that to make sure that they have given them the right pieces or they have the right items for a quick change. There's rentals paperwork, keeping track of where you've rented from and when it's due back and all of those things. There's definitely financial paperwork, keeping track of receipts, all of that stuff. So it's a lot of that, but it's also like having to switch back and forth very quickly between all of that organizational stuff and like artistic chaos, of which there is a lot.
Right. Because ultimately,
so,
you are the implementer of the larger design that's been created. You're the one who has to really make sure that it is overseen to make it happen. Yes.
Yeah. And then at a certain point, there's also like, there's shopping, like in addition to the fabric, like any contemporary clothing shopping. There's pulling at rental houses if it's a period show in particular. There's a lot of emailing and a lot of communicating, depending on who the designer is and how they like to handle that. And then once you feel like you're almost done, there's also swings that you have to clothe.
Oh, right.
And like something that I've learned a lot about is how stupid internal swings are in COVID times. Because, you know, one person goes down and there's this ripple effect.
Yeah.
And then 3 people go down and your show closes 3 days before Christmas. You know, like it's
right.
It's a little wild that we're doing internal swings in this time, but we are. And so then it's like making all of that tracking paperwork so that, you know, if they use some items from their normal track, but also have specialty items for their understudy track, that wardrobe knows how to find those things and when they wear those things, because by the time that they go on, I'm long gone, and so is the designer. So
right.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah, I think that is something that makes design very unique, is that your job is done when it's frozen, and then you're gone, and then hopefully there's been enough information and systems in place that the people who are still there helping out and making these things happen regularly, so they know what to do. My brain wants to explode even just thinking about that.
Yeah. And I did all of that for the first time this winter on a very large new musical, and I was overwhelmed for sure, but you know, we did it.
You did.
It opened, it ran, it closed, and nobody died. So we're doing okay.
Nobody died, thank goodness. One other aspect of this job I feel like people may not know, and I feel like is worth saying here. Can you speak a little bit to the purchasing aspect and like how it works budgetarily with over purchase and then return? Because I think, again, costumes are unique in this way, and I don't know that a lot of people know.
Yeah. It can be tricky because depending on the size of the company you're working for, they may or may not give you the funds to over purchase the way that most designers would like to. So particularly in film, you know, you end up buying, because of the timelines largely, you end up buying about the guideline the most recent designer I worked with uses is 3 times the budget that you have for that character. You'll spend that amount of money. Yeah. You'll spend 3 times their budget just to be able to fit them. And then you have to return 2/3 of that or more. We actually, on this last movie, I definitely returned more than 2/3, because we spent like 4 or 5 times the budget for this one character, just because he needed suits, which are expensive, and also vary a lot in cut and how flattering they are per person. And he was coming from I think London on 2 separate occasions, so we had like very short time frames to be able to fit him. So we spent like 45 grand in a week.
Oh my God.
And at the end of the day, the budget for his character was like $6,800.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So and not all of that 45 grand was on him, but like most of it was. The accounting department was freaking out. They were like, could you not? And we were like, no.
You want clothes for this character, right? So here's what we gotta do.
So we do that. We do a fitting. We reject a whole bunch of stuff, and then if you're lucky, there's an entry level person in your department who takes care of a lot of those returns. But in my case, it was me.
This I
so
recall.
not only was I doing like, and this was like a very small crew. There were only 2 of us in our department, me and the designer. So we both were doing things that are not technically in our job description, because it just had to be done. But then I spent many days schlepping lots of bags throughout Soho trying to get things returned, and it was very hot and very sweaty. And then there's also like, once stores figure out you're a stylist, if you go back there a lot, like they'll nab you with like, you have to keep 30% of this receipt, and like they're really, a lot of stores are cracking down on stylists, but it's like, we're just trying to do our job. Your return policy is in place for everyone else. Like, why is it different for people that have to buy a lot? Like, what, it's just what we have to do.
Yeah.
So there's also a lot of like telling stories that may be true, but it's not why you're shopping today. Like, I bought suits telling the salespeople that I was helping my roommate figure out his personal style, which is not untrue.
That
That's
was
a thing
indeed
that's
happening.
And it was even close to your size. But I'm not going to buy you a suit. Sorry.
What? Hey, I've got a budget of $0, please.
Well, yeah, Todd Snyder is probably a little expensive.
Alas. All right,
So.
very, very, very interesting. I mean, these are parts of your job in your department that I did not know until, honestly, we were living together over the past couple of years. I really heard more about the inner workings. So I thought perhaps the audience may be interested in such things. See, I told you these initial questions would get us chatting a lot. So we're touching on some of what we're going to chat about anyway. But my third question for you is there something that you've seen as your greatest success thus far in your career?
Probably. This is harder.
It is always harder to talk about the positives. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, to speak about a particular production, and it's frustrating for me that this is an academic production, because I wish more people could have seen it, honestly, because it's like, I was fortunate to have an opportunity to design Spring Awakening my last year of grad school. And that was a dream show for me, because I love period clothes. I love period clothes with a contemporary twist. I love doing something that's like not fully of a time and place. Like, I love to have the flexibility to play with details and things. And I think it's a brilliant adaptation, again, of an old story that still has relevance, that still resonates with young people. Because, you know, we live in a time and place that has adopted 19th century German values in ways that are very problematic.
I don't know what you're talking about. What?
And so, yeah, it was an absolute dream. And I was able to incorporate some of my favorite things, which are knitwear.
Yeah.
That was a little bit anachronistic, but made a lot of sense because there's a lot that happens outdoors. And I was able to do like really fun, and we got to build everything. Like this was the I think the biggest triumph for me is like I had an opportunity to do this as though it were Broadway. Because this never happens, right? Like if it's not Broadway, you're not building everything.
Right.
It's not a thing. It's just not a thing. But I designed something, and I'm not going to say that this was on purpose, but I designed something that we couldn't rent.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, luckily I had a department that instead of saying, you're going to have to redesign it because we don't have the budget or the time or the support for this, they said, I think we can do this. Let's figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it was Spring Awakening really, in terms of like cast size and number of clothes, is not that big of a show. But for someone who has never had the opportunity to build an entire musical before, wow, that was overwhelming, because you have to choose every fabric, every lining, every trim, every detail of a collar, a sleeve, or a skirt length, or a ruffle. Like you have to make decisions about all of those things. And you know what I really hate is making decisions.
I can attest, it's true.
Because once you've made a decision, you have left so many other decisions behind, and you can no longer make that decision.
Right. Yeah.
So it was, and I shopped for fabric in New York, which was like a mission of mine during school, because I knew I was moving here, and I went to school in Texas, which there are some fabric stores in Houston, but Austin is a total fabric desert. There's like nowhere. So I did my fabric shopping in New York because I wanted, by the time I got here, I wanted to be proficient, which I now definitely am. And the show, it was just a beautiful show. And the interim chair of our department, who has now gone on to, he's starting this fall as the chair of the theater department at Carnegie Mellon, he pulled me aside at intermission. We weren't even done with the show yet. And he said, this is the most beautiful design I've seen on a UT stage in like maybe the whole time I've been here.
Yeah,
like
I didn't know that. You didn't even tell me that.
Yeah, he said like the nicest things, and he's a knitter too, so he appreciated the knitwear. Which we didn't make for the most part, other than the shawl I was knitting like during tech. But yeah, he said like really kind, wonderful things. And the best part about that was that it just matched how I felt about it. Like I was very proud of it. I was very happy with it. There were very few things that I would change. Like if I designed it again, would I do something different? Sure. Yeah. But there are very few things that I would have changed about that production. So, and we had a great team. Like we had a team that we all felt like we could respond to each other's work and like raise questions of like, you know, integrity to the storytelling. And like, it was a very safe process where, and very trusting.
Design team, like production.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I thought that might be your answer on this question, because I've heard you talk about this process so many times and how much you loved it. By the way, are there places where people could see pictures of set design?
There are. Uh, there's one place. I never put it on my Instagram, which is something I should do when the anniversary rolls around. But my website is just my full name.com. It's Stephanie Mae, Mae Fisher.com.
And that's Fisher with
and they're
no
all
C,
there.
just S-H.
No C, the English way.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
Yeah, it's all there.
Highly suggest people go
There
take a look.
Too many photos of that show, actually. Like I have been told that I could probably pare it down, but if I do that, I won't have one of every character, and then I'll be sad. So
Fair enough.
it's hard. It's hard when you made everything, because it's not like I bought that or I pulled that off a rack. It's like, no, I put effort into making it that thing. So
yeah, I mean, like, literal definition of originating artist. Idea was from you, and then from the ground up, everything built from that brain of yours, which I think is just so freaking cool. I think you just answered the next question, which is, which of your full designs are you most proud of? However, I'll still throw it out there because there's a second part to that one, which is, do you have a favorite specific piece that you've ever designed?
Favorite individual piece is probably from a different show. Because the thing about Spring Awakening is that it was such an ensemble piece. And so like every piece of it had to fit with all the other pieces of it. In a way that, and especially because it's a small cast, like that's a different, when it's a big cast, it's almost easier because you can use the same color twice. And like, like stuff like that. But when you have 5 girls, like you have a pink, a blue, a yellow, an orange, a purple, like, it's like,
right, there's
only so much you can do. And then you have to do that. And then you want to make it not look like that, which is also really hard. But
unique without looking like a standout.
Yeah. Well, and without looking like you just like vomited a rainbow on stage. It's tricky. So unless you want that, if that's what you're going for, like, more power to you.
Totally. Very appropriate for some shows, I'm sure.
But another thing from grad school that I was really proud of was we did this play called Matawan, written by my dear friend Dan, who also lives in New York now. Actually, you guys should meet. I didn't know that he lived in New York until very recently. But it's about a shark, which, as you may know, lives underwater. And so, and half of the play takes place, like it's from the point of view of the shark. So you're very much like underwater with the shark when you do this beautiful play that Dan wrote. And so but there were stage directions about how the shark had been done in previous iterations, but those were very low budget, like Chicago storefront situations. And so Dan basically said to us, like, this is what we did, but I'm not tied to any of this. So like, do whatever you want, which is awesome that he was just like so open to whatever we came up with, as was our director. Our director did not come in, my friend Lane, did not come in with a plan for what they wanted the shark to be. They said, come back to me in a week with your ideas and we'll just talk about them. And so we did that, and we ended up making a movement ensemble, which I think every like faculty person we said this to was like, okay.
Good luck.
Like, if you can make that not look bad, we'll be really surprised. But it ended up being very cool. And so the shark started as one person who was also the voice of the shark, and grew to I think 23 people
Oh
by
my
the
God.
end because this yeah, it was big. This shark in the story enters smaller and smaller waterways and is also literally growing. She's pregnant. And so by adding people to this ensemble body, we were also giving the impression that she was entering smaller space, even though the actual footprint of the space stayed the same. And so I did the ensemble costumes. Actually, I would do differently now. Like on that one, I chose to build a bunch of the human period pieces, and that was not the right move. We should have put our energy into the shark. So we should have built all of that shark ensemble, but that's not where the shop wanted to put energy in. And I do understand that, because in terms of like what I designed and good projects for the students and good things to add to stock and stuff like that, it made sense to build human clothes that could be reused and were good period construction projects.
They need humans.
Yeah, but so we did like mostly some dyeing on existing pieces for the ensemble, but for the shark figurehead, we built this thing that was like sort of 1920s inspired. The story takes place in 1916, so the shark was this like looking toward the future kind of, but it was not in period fabrics. It was in fabrics that looked like shark skin. So it was like big paillette sequins and iridescent chiffon to like give the impression of movement. It's sort of like Rainbow Fish, if you know that book. Definitely inspired by Rainbow Fish.
That's cool.
And also a lot of fashion, like runway stuff that I found. And I love that costume. It was destroyed by the end because it had to go through some things, but it makes me really happy to think about. And the movement ensemble was very successful. So
heck yeah.
We proved everybody wrong.
Oh, I love that. I love that a lot. And there's pictures of that on your website as well, yes?
Yes, absolutely. I also got to do a blue whale for that one. So that was exciting. Also, like anthropomorphized is definitely still a human playing a whale, but yeah.
That's so cool. I guess I didn't know about the movement ensemble aspect of that show, which I think that's a brilliant idea to try. And I'm so glad that it worked too, because that must have been a lot of fun to put together, first of all, but it seems a very smart way to go about shifting size in a way that is not going to force like major set changes or
right, or building like 3 puppets, which like we didn't really have the capacity to do. So
excellent problem solving. Very cool. Very cool. All right, I've got one last question for you.
Okay.
Which is there a specific show, or it could be a musical movie, that made a particular impression on you as a child?
Yes. I remember being at home at the age of 5 with chickenpox, unable to go to school, and watching, not for the first time, I'm 5 years old, Gone with the Wind. Which is it's not appropriate for a 5-year-old.
No.
And it has a lot of problems in today's world. But obviously, like, I didn't realize this till years later when I had decided I was going to be a costume designer, come hell or high water. Obviously, what I loved about it was the clothes.
Yeah.
And in like 2012 or 13, I was in Boise, Idaho, and there's this beautiful 1920s movie theater there that's all the decor is Egyptian inspired, and it's like been preserved and renovated, and like it's really gorgeous. And they showed Gone with the Wind that summer when I was in Idaho, and I went, and I had never seen it on a big screen before. I'd only seen it on like square TVs, like pre-flat screen even. And I was sitting like 3 rows back and looking at this giant screen and just thinking, oh my God, they did all of this without the internet. Like this giant film and they like wrote letters or made phone calls, I guess, to get what they needed.
Wrote
Like
letters.
they couldn't order, they didn't have Amazon, they weren't like,
No.
I don't know, it just like boggled my mind to think that they did such a huge production, and like knowing they must have needed multiples of all of those gowns, and like just like totally blew my mind that they could achieve something of that scale at that time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that white dress with the green and the hat, like I still want one.
Yes, I could see you. I could see you in that outfit for sure. That's an excellent point though about those old films, those old very grandiose films. They did all that kind of just out of their brains and passed down information and as many books as they could possibly use as research. Like very different way of designing things.
Yeah, the research, and then which like honestly, when I was an undergrad back in the day, in the olden days, we were required to research from books. And I remember my costume design professor cautioned us against Wikipedia all the time. She always said
Wikipedia. Oh goodness.
And like it was the early days of Pinterest, and now I can use Pinterest as a research tool because I'm good enough at particular decades that I can really like piece out, okay, like this is probably early 1890s, this is probably 1895 because the sleeves are bigger. So like even if it's not dated, I can corroborate things and figure it out. But when you're 18 and you've never researched a design before, like don't start at Pinterest. You can use it for inspiration, but in terms of details, like you got to go to a book. And I still think that I have tons of books.
You do.
So
you do. Very large, very interesting books. Yeah, very cool. Very cool. The amount of knowledge you have in your brain that I don't know anything about fascinates me. I want all of it. Can you just like write out everything you know for me so I can take a look? That'd be great. Thank you.
That's what I get paid for, actually.
Oh, well. All right. I'll come up with a budget.
Another point though that I thought of that I'd like to make before we move on is like technology is so helpful and so useful, and I'm so glad we have it. And because of the way things like the internet have sped up the way we are able to work, there's now this expectation that we will work at this increased speed. And it just keeps pushing us, like something like Amazon Prime. I wish I didn't have to use Amazon every day of my working life, but I really don't have a choice. Like if I, and especially at levels where the company isn't providing a Prime account, like if I don't have a Prime account, I can't do my job. And so I just think that's worth putting out there into the world to say, like, I think a lot about how we are pushed to perform at a certain level at a certain speed, and how technology has contributed to that speed and increased that speed.
Yeah, it's almost like instead of providing more time so that these resources can be utilized in a way that would allow for, let's say, a larger production or something. Instead, it's like, oh, well, if you can get material that fast, then you can do X, Y, or Z, which is much larger than what you would have been able to do in that same period of time before.
Right.
But really, that's just compounding the issue and not solving the thing.
Yeah. And COVID has really challenged that because the supply chains have been so screwed up.
Yeah.
And so it's been very difficult. Like last November, I was working on a musical and trying to find a full seat dance belt. Like you couldn't get one for love or money. Like there was just they didn't exist in the world I had orders canceled. Tights, skin tone tights, like a couple of companies that made a large variety of skin tones have gone out of business, or they're not able to get the same tights manufactured that they've had for years, that the industry has relied on.
Yeah.
And so it's been a mess, and yet no one has lengthened the timelines for getting any of this done. It's just like constantly finding another way to make it happen.
Yeah, which I don't think is unique to our industry. However, I will say that it is something that I see across our industry. A lot of the push and the go and the faster and the better, and without necessarily taking into consideration the human component of what all of that really means, whether that be in the midst of a pandemic or just like the exhaustion level and the number of hours worked by people involved. I think that is something that we can all do better with, just across the board.
And I often think that costume designers and other people in the costume portion of the industry are sort of uniquely situated to address some of those things for a couple of reasons. Number one, because we're often kind of shunted into this women's work category, we've been fighting this fight for ourselves for a long time to try to be paid for the amount of work that we're doing. But also, compassion for the other human components of production is so much a part of what we do every day. Like we bring it into the fitting room. We think about it when we sketch. When we draw a body, many of us, if not all of us, are thinking about, does this body match or represent the body of the actual performer? Like, can I take this into a fitting and know that the performer is going to feel supported and reflected in this, rather than like shamed or disconnected from it. So I do think costume folks, many of us are trying to be at the forefront of this conversation, because we are thinking not only about ourselves, but about the other humans all in this, art soup that we're making.
Art soup. Yeah, let's actually stay on this for a moment, because I think this is a really good entryway into talking about design as part of the collaborative process. Because I think oftentimes we talk about collaboration just generally in this industry. Actors get left out of that convo, but that's ridiculous. They are there very much so as the representation of in the final product, and they are there along the way as well, right? They're not just working with directors and musical directors, but they are working with designers in different ways, and especially costume designers. I think it would be worth hearing a little bit from you, if you don't mind, your process of going through, thinking through interactions with performers in ways that are specifically, as you were saying, not going to bring negativity or shame into the room, but being as what's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Being as open to what they're thinking and feeling and how they're responding to things as possible. Can you talk through that process a little bit?
Totally. So I will admit that when I first started out, I did not come from training that included actors as collaborators. And I think I definitely, like now with more years of experience behind me, I definitely think it's different with students, but that's like, I think what I came from is like the wrong way to address it with students. Undergraduate students oftentimes don't have like the clarity about like what can happen in a fitting room to really feel like they're a participant.
Right.
And they also many times have not, like, I'm putting them in a corset for the first time. And so they don't have the supporting experience to say, actually, I think this character wouldn't wear a corset. Like, I know it's period, but like, here are the reasons why maybe it wouldn't be this, or it would be a corset, but it would be, say, like one that has elastic or something that gives them more flexibility, or whatever. And we can talk through that compromise, if there's money and time to make that happen.
Right.
That's a whole other part of it. But or like, oh, this feels a little sexy for this character, and I'm just not sure that's really how this character feels in this scene. And like, here's what I think: she actually might be self-conscious, and maybe if we change this about the costume, it would express that better, or it would help me on stage. It's hard for me to come up with examples because I'm thinking about working with students, and I've never had a conversation like that working with an undergraduate student, although I try to invite it.
Right.
But I found that a lot of times they're just not ready for that conversation, or they're too focused on like trying to figure out how to stand still for 2 hours
Fair.
to be thinking about that. But the thing that I always do take in is like, I want you to let me know if you're uncomfortable. I want you to let me know if you feel dizzy. If we need to rip you out of this corset, we will do it. You got to tell me. You just have to communicate with me. If you need water, tell me. If you need to sit for a minute, tell me. If you have to take the shoes off, tell me.
Yeah.
And so that's like at a very basic level of compassion. That's where I like to set the baseline. Like, I need you to be alive at the end of this fitting. And I would love it. I would love it if you were also in a really good mood and like thrilled about the direction we're headed together.
Right.
But at the very least, I need you to be alive.
Right. Yeah. So what's really interesting in hearing you talk about that is, as a performer, and I was definitely a performer before I was a writer, and I still work as a performer. This is not a conversation I was taught how to have, but I'll go one step further and say that there have been times educationally and professionally where I have tried to have or start those conversations, and I've been shut down or shamed for it. Which I don't think is ever okay, to shame people for any sort of input that they want to be giving. I mean, if there's not time, money, or like space for it, that's one thing, but don't bring shame into the conversation. But I do think that is something that we don't talk about across the industry. We don't train actors to speak up about their thoughts on a character, right? So often it's the design presentation happens, and that's when the actor is seeing for the first time what kind of thing they'll be wearing, and then it is presented to them, and it's try this on, and that's it. And like, there's no more to it than that, and they're never talked through what kind of empowerment they do have to say, at the very least, this is very uncomfortable. Yes, it fits. And yes, I see that it's on your paper in front of you as part of the design, but this is extremely uncomfortable. Like, and if we can't have those kinds of conversations, then as a baseline, then how are we going to have conversations of like, I feel like I see where you're coming from here with the design you put in front of me, but I also have this thought. Is this a viable thought?
Right. Yeah, and I think like one of the flaws that I see in the way we educate theater makers is that there's a career trajectory that for many people ends in teaching. And I understand why it's that way. You have to have an MFA or equivalent experience and whatever. And it's important that it's that way.
Yeah.
And yet, because we work in a field that doesn't have like continued professional development as part of our lives, so many of the people teaching new professionals and I think there's a turnover happening now. Like there's a lot of change happening, but certainly when I was an undergrad, so many of the people teaching came from a tradition of, this is the design, you put it on, you wear it, there's no conversation here.
Right.
And also a tradition of a lot of body shaming. Like
that too.
The amount of body shaming I have heard directed at young, well, any age, but particularly young performers is appalling.
Yep.
And so the fact that is like so ubiquitous in the way costume design is taught is like, it has to change. It just can't be that way. You know, like it was never okay.
No.
But like the world now is saying, we're not doing this.
Right.
Like we can't do it.
Right. And
so yeah, that's like I always come in wanting the body and mind of the actor to be at ease,
which is a beautiful and brilliant goal.
I say a lot that, like, somebody once asked me for another interview, what is costume design? And the first thing I said was, it's therapy. Because I'm a little bit like your hairdresser, right? Or your nail technician that you say everything to, because we have to very quickly have that level of trust in order to move forward together, and for everyone to be not only happy, but like comfortable and supported and able to do their job. Because ultimately, my design is about supporting the actor's ability to do their job.
Right. The story can't be told if they don't feel comfortable enough to tell the story.
Right. Or if the design doesn't match with their interpretation of the story, like, I need to know that. That's a conversation we need to have. And maybe we need to bring the director into it too and say, like, we're missing each other here. And like, you've obviously talked to me as the designer and to the actor. So how do we triangulate this into something that works for all of us?
Collaboration.
That said, you know, that's in a perfect world. And it's really hard, again, in the timelines that we have, to make that happen a lot of the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just off that point quickly, I just did a summer stock show, and the entire process from first day to closing of the show was 23 days total. It's like there isn't time to be having those kinds of conversations, because everything is being put together, built, bought. Wow, we are doing our 8 days of rehearsal before tech begins. Like, there isn't time in that kind of a process, which is unfortunate. And is there more flexibility that should be had in there? Probably. And how do we figure that out? But I do also want to go back quickly to this idea of bringing the director in. I also think that that's very important in terms of the body shaming aspect too, because I think sometimes, I think it used to be often, I think we're moving towards sometimes. The culture created by the directors is less body shaming, at least blatantly, but still seems to be part of the overall environment of the production. And if the director is kind of supposed to be heading the ship here, or in a larger production, it could even be producers who might be setting that tone. These are conversations that we have to be having. Like, it's not okay coming from any level of the hierarchy to be doing that to anybody, on stage or off.
Yeah, and so I've worked in bridal, and it's the same thing, except that actors do this all the time and brides do it once. Like, they come into this fitting room and they are planning a day where they are in the spotlight the whole time, and they want it to be perfect. And so theater is the best training for working in bridal that I could possibly imagine, or for being a bride, like for any aspect of weddings. But it is near to impossible to convince a bride that what she's seeing is a problem with the clothes It's not with her body.
Oh, oh,
And that
yeah.
that is always true. Like, if something's not working, you know what's really easy to change?
Yeah.
And until about the last 50 years, people had all of their clothes altered. You know, even if they were buying things off the rack, they still went to their dressmaker or went to their dry cleaner or whoever and said, could you just like nip this in here and let it out here and shorten this here? And like, that was just a part of the vocabulary of how people got dressed. But we're now far enough removed from that people think it's a problem with themselves. And the media, there's so much media that pushes that messaging. I can't even watch television with commercials anymore because it's so bad. But so whenever I have a chance, I try to remind people that like clothes as we buy them today are not made for your body.
Right.
They're made on a mannequin, the shape and sizing of which has not changed in 70 years. And because of the way manufacturing has sped up and become more abusive,
yes,
clothes aren't even made well anymore. So like, you know, you can buy two tops in the same size and have them fit completely differently. So how is this a problem with your body?
Right.
It's not.
Right.
And it never was.
Right. Oh my
So that's
goodness.
what I want people to know when they come into a fitting with me, is that like, your body is never the issue. It is never the problem. I made a mistake. The clothes are bad.
Yeah.
I want to fix it now.
Yeah, I hear you. Very much so. And like I'll just say for the audience watching, just on a more personal note, I've been kind of going through this experience with Stephanie kind of coaching me through this over the past several months as I am beginning to explore getting a wardrobe that fits my body for the first time in my life. And that idea that you said, that's really hard for people to get in their heads of the clothes are the problem, not you, is really hard, because you're right. All of the messaging is there's something wrong with you. Your body is this or that, and that is not okay. And therefore, that's why this isn't fitting. And that, has been a hard pill for me to swallow personally. But also, I think that a lot of the performers out there could really use that reminder that it's not you. You're not the problem.
Well, yeah, because performers are being put through a meat grinder in terms of body image. And like,
say that again.
Like, and it's not fair and it's not acceptable. And like I made a joke, I don't know when it was, I think it was to you though, just recently, that like, they only put hot people on TV, but like, why is that? And could we maybe adjust what that looks and feels like? Like, maybe we still only put hot people on TV, but maybe hot people is a much broader definition.
Yes.
Like, yeah. So I feel for performers, because like, I didn't pursue performing professionally, so I didn't get all of that messaging from that perspective, but I certainly got it. And have spent a lot of time and energy working on my relationship with my own body, because I don't think that I can do my job really and hate my body.
Oof.
Because I don't think I can support people the way they need to be supported who are also struggling with those things if I am still like deep in that struggle.
And I think that is important, that any of us who works, I was gonna say in this industry, but I guess really anywhere, that just, you can't help other people through something or with something if you have not been able to do that work first yourself, or at least have started it, being on the journey. I think that's also a good and important reminder.
Because it's like a judgment thing. Like if I'm judging myself, how can I say that I'm not judging other people for that same thing?
Right.
Like that's not a thing.
Yeah. So on the collaboration piece here, just before we get to our final questions and things, I do, since this is a channel about writing, ultimately, I mean, it's about all theater storytelling for sure, but writers specifically. Could you speak to the process a bit about collaborating with writers, especially on new works?
It is different every time. And I've had very good experiences, mostly, and a couple of like very challenging experiences working with writers. And I mean, I could speculate as to what that comes down to. I think most often it probably has to do with like their feelings of ownership about the work. And possibly how insecure they are about it, but that's like truly conjecture. I don't
know. I mean, the answer is we're all insecure about our writing, always and forevermore.
Yeah. But I think like something that doesn't happen a lot in academic environments, again, with, you know, the way they're set up, is that writers and designers don't get a lot of opportunities to just like sit down and talk about the work. And like for writers to be like, hey, would you read this and like tell me, you know, just like tell me what your first thoughts are about the design. And I, even as a costume designer, I always start with thinking about the space. So even though I'm not designing the scenery, I think about the environment, and I think about like, I gather research that, you know, is photography or art or whatever that has nothing to do with clothes, that just like expresses a vibe. And I know directors do that a lot of times too, and will give designers their version of that.
Yeah.
But I think like the most awesome opportunities I've had to work with writers have always been when the writers are like, when they truly trust designers to do their jobs. And also like, I don't know, I think sometimes the hardest thing is like, it feels like the playwright or directors sometimes too, think that designers are trying to ruin their play. Or like or like do something, and they've never said this to me. I don't know if that's really what they think, but from the designer's perspective, it feels like that sometimes, where it's like they think that we're pushing back about something because we want to ruin the production. And it's never that. It's because we feel a disconnect between what is written, what the director is trying to, like the story the director is trying to tell, and what we're doing. And so we're usually just trying to ask the best possible questions to get us all telling the same story. Right. And I think that's like, I've struggled with directors a lot on this. If I can't get them to really like hone in on what story they're trying to tell, I have a hard time doing my job. Because I need to know where to put the focus.
Right. Yeah, I have so many thoughts here. The first of which is that, and you and I have had this discussion before, that costume designers are some of the best dramaturgs of a production. Like, if there is not a hired dramaturg, I bet your costume designer and your director have done the most research out of everybody. No offense to the other design teams, I love you all. But I do think that ends up being true a lot of the time. And so I'd be curious to know from you your feelings on how early in a process writers really can start thinking about speaking with designers. Whether or not they end up designing the piece is a different story. But
Mhm.
like speaking with designers, having designers look at material, and how that could potentially be beneficial to everybody involved.
I think at the point that a writer is thinking about scheduling a reading and like wants people in the room to offer feedback, designers of every discipline should be a part of that room, that audience.
Ooh, that's the pull quote from this interview. Say that again. As
I
soon
don't
as
remember what I said.
first the writer's thinking about the very first reading for feedback, that designers of every discipline should be in the room. Yes, say more about that.
Well, so everybody, like, my experience of playwrights doing readings of their work is that usually everyone who shows up, might not be everyone they invite, I will grant that, but usually everyone who shows up is other writer friends of theirs, maybe a director friend or two, and actors.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are many reasons for that are, you know, it's all like how we socialize, like the people that we gravitate towards and like the way academic programs are structured, that's who we end up being around all the time. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that.
Totally.
But I think playwrights do themselves a disservice if they don't know designers who are willing to offer feedback on their work. Because, like, just for a really dumb example, that the shark play that I mentioned before is a period piece, take place in 1916. And there was a line in the play, and this was not a play that was still in development. Like at the point I was designing it, it was a finished play that the playwright was no longer working on. But there was a moment when I was like, hey, Dan, I know you're not working on this play, but I just want to offer something. There's this line in the script about how the father character has a sunburn on his neck.
Mm-hmm.
And that is physically impossible because the shirts he's wearing have collars that go all the way up to his hairline. And there just wouldn't really, and also like the audience isn't going to see that when, you know, the mother gestures to it, because he's going to be wearing a collar that goes all the way up to his hairline. So, and he was willing to receive that feedback and change the line, even though he was perfectly satisfied with where the play was.
Right.
So, you know, that's the kind of thing that had I been in the room at the first reading in Chicago, however many years ago, I would have said it then and not had to be like the jerk who says it, you know, going into tech of the third production.
Right.
So it's sometimes it's little stuff like that. And sometimes I think designers are really good at seeing the big picture. Because we have to in order to work together and in order to communicate. And so, you know, at the moment when a playwright is like deep in their play and
we can't see anything.
And there's like particular things that they're like hyper focused on that they can't get out of their brains, designers can pull back and say, oh yeah, I wasn't even worried about that this time through, but here are the things I worried about. Right. Like, you wrote a cinematic script for the stage, and how are we going to do those transitions? And no one can change their clothes that fast. And like, some of it is practical stuff, and some of it is storytelling. Some of it is like, I know this takes place in a bog and in 3 time periods, but what is the story about?
Yeah. Yes, my brain is like firing so fast right now, because now I'm thinking about King's Legacy specifically, but also even before getting to that, I love hearing the perspectives of people on my work in general. And I think sometimes I get quizzical looks from other writers who are like, you're having who listen in? And how? For what? I'm like, well, because there are things that I'm not going to be able to see, right? So For instance, having the last reading I did of King's Legacy, designers who had already designed the piece came in and listened to the new version of, to basically be listening for, is there anything in here that isn't making sense now with the story that we are all collectively trying to tell? Mm-hmm. Are there moments that are potentially problematic? Specifically, like you were just saying, cinematic piece transitions, right? King's Legacy moves fast and there are a lot of locations. And so early on, I had a lighting designer look at the show and be like, just tell me, is this doable? Can we create this many spaces with lights? Is that an option? And it was like, oh yeah, no problem. None whatsoever, which was great to hear. But then the first time I brought it to a costume designer, they were like, how do you expect to have this many people playing this many roles? I was like, okay, we are going to pare down the cast. And like now the cast is 9 and there are fewer characters. And it's still a little bit crazy at times in that show. But at least there was feedback to be had along the way and things that I could adjust. Or even in a reading in 2019, I had an actress listening in to the Anne Boleyn track to make sure that I had not screwed with the track in a way where it would be impossible to do something like a quick change into, I don't know, say a wedding dress for the Act 1 finale, you know, like things like that, you know, where we as writers can't possibly be listening in for all of that at once. Yeah. While still trying to tell the story we're trying to tell. I think it's a brilliant idea to have designers in early.
Yeah, and I think like that the place where we miss each other more often than not is like, I'm gonna ask probing questions, but I'm not asking those questions because I don't want it to work or even because I think it can't work. I'm just asking them so that you're thinking about them.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not saying a cinematic script is a bad thing, but it's better if you're thinking early on, before you get to a production, about how much time is actually in those transitions and what needs to occur in those transitions.
Yeah.
Because if you don't think about that until the first production, then you're going to start hearing no from people. Mm-hmm. And wouldn't it be better if everybody came into that first production thinking about the possibilities rather than the places where you have to say no?
Right.
Nobody wants to do that. It's not fun to have to say no.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, you use the term probing questions, but like, I know that the general basis of those questions is usually just why. Like, this is a moment here. Why is it there? What is it serving? Which I will say, as a writer, can often feel like an attack, being like, what? What do you mean why? Because I wrote it.
Yeah.
But yeah. But obviously, it is an important thing to consider, because you may then think about it and be like, well, that was for a moment of a draft 3 drafts ago. It really has no place anymore. It doesn't need to be there.
You know? And we're usually, I would say, at least for me, like, I'm usually asking why the way a toddler asks why.
Right, yes.
Like, why is the sky blue? Why are there stars? Why is the world round? Why do our neighbors have a cat and we don't? Like, I'm asking from a place of like expansiveness and just wanting to hear what you have to say. And then once I hear what you have to say, then I might push you to think, do you need it?
Yes, right.
But it's the why is really just so that then we can have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in that same way, a lot of the best collaborative directors will do the same thing, sitting down with a writer and a script the first time, just asking, great, so why is this happening here, and why does this character do this, and just trying to get the full. Because I think something that writers often forget is the amount of information in our brains about the thing we wrote. We are showing a fraction of that, the tiniest sliver
Yeah.
is actually in the piece that we are handing over to everyone. The rest of this gigantic pie of information is in here, and no one else knows what it is. So when people are
except
asking,
for Tennessee Williams. He actually gives us too much.
the shade. I will say there are certainly some writers out there who put all of their thoughts on the paper to make sure that it happens in exactly the way that they had intended. Yes, that is definitely a thing that occurs. But for the most part, yeah, I think it's important for writers to remember that when people are asking why or what is this about, it's literally they just don't know and they want to know.
Yeah.
So we can tell the story. Good. Wonderful. Wonderful. Oh, you're great to speak with. Well, I know that. I talk to you every day. But I've got three little finisher questions here. You ready?
Okay.
Okay. What is your favorite non-theatrical activity?
Ooh. Probably knitting.
Ooh. What do you knit?
But maybe sewing. Lately sweaters and monsters.
The monsters are so cute.
But I knit pretty much everything because I had taught myself, and it's like the only time I've stuck with something until I was good at it, instead of like getting frustrated and giving up.
I don't think that's necessarily true, just considering the amount of skills you've also acquired for your work.
Well, okay, it's the only time I've done that like entirely on my own, without like outside forces requiring that I continue.
Fair enough. Just as a little anecdote there, Stephanie did also knit me a gigantic Gryffindor scarf, which is beautiful and wonderful, one of my favorite things. She's very good. Lovely, great. Next question: is there a story? Could be a story that doesn't exist yet in any medium, or it could be a show or a TV show or a film that already does kind of exist in the zeitgeist that you really want to be designing for at some point.
Oh.
Like a story.
Oh God, I know there is, but am I going to be able to think of it now? This is like trivia. This is where my mind goes totally blank.
Oh, yeah, trivia.
I don't know. I might have to get back to you on that one and put it in the show notes.
That's fair. That's totally fair.
Yeah, because that's a big question. But I guarantee whatever it is, it's period, and there's a female protagonist.
Yeah.
And more female and or gender expansive characters than male characters, for sure.
So what I'm hearing is it's the King's Legacy. Oh my God, what a weird thing. That's crazy.
That's so weird. Crazy.
How strange. Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And like, because I know some of the projects that you've said in the past that you'd really love to do at some point. Eurydice was on that list.
Oh yeah.
And like,
but again, like everything Sarah Rule has ever written is on that list.
Right.
So.
We can just blanketly say Sarah Rule's entire, I was going to say discography. Not the right word.
I love it though. That's what her next anthology should be called.
Oh goodness. All right, and last.
I want the hardcover box set.
Yes, you do. It will go on our bookshelves. Last big question here. What is something that you love or are proud of you don't get to speak about often?
Oh wow!
And
why
speaking about it to me
difficult?
doesn't count because you say
okay. Because I say everything to you. Yeah. So Because there aren't a lot of contexts where it is appropriate to talk about this, and I usually think it's not a good idea to talk about this. Um, I am I'm really proud of the work I've done around like being comfortable in my own skin. And it is related to my work, but like it's something that's hard to talk about because it's very personal, and not everyone in my life is welcome to that part of my experience.
Right.
But I think it's so imperative. And I remember when I was like 24, I had a friend who was in his late 30s, and I met some of his friends who were also in their late 30s. And I thought, wow, I can't wait to be in my 30s, because then I'm going to have it all figured out, and I'm going to like myself, and I'm going to have like just like the best people in my life. And so now I'm 34 and I'm still working on it, but I have 4 years to get there. And so it's like all of that work, I think, is like so important to living the life that I want to live.
That is such a good answer, Steph. That is such a good answer. Oh, we don't talk about that enough as a people. But man, that work is so important. And you're right, it's so personal, but there's a lot to be proud of. Good answers. This was fun. I know you already gave your website address, but can you tell the people where they can follow you and learn more?
Absolutely. My professional website is www.stephaniemaefisher.com. I have an Instagram that I don't update as much as I should, but I am working on that too. And that is at Silk Dupioni, SILKDUPIONI. And I think that's all. Something we didn't talk about at all today, though, I'm realizing, is like my thesis work. And that might be a really interesting topic for future conversation.
We'll just have to come back then.
Guess so.
Yeah, that is a very interesting conversation. We absolutely should have that come at some point. And for those of you taking notes at home, don't you worry, those will be in the show notes as well. Her website and her handle. Well, but thank you for being here and chatting with me on this, and going on this really good adventure of information and deep diving. I really appreciate the conversation today.
Thanks for giving me a chance to wear my favorite Zoom lipstick.
If no one else gets anything else out of it, Stephanie got to wear her favorite Zoom lipstick, and that is important. But thank you to all of you for watching or listening to today's episode. And don't forget that if you enjoyed this content, please hit the like button and subscribe, and share it with people that you think would enjoy this. Otherwise, we'll be back with some more interviews soon. All right, everyone. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you all for being here with me today, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.